Welcome across the world. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Nice to meet you all. I'm Kay. I'm an active angel investor here in Silicon Valley. And today, I want to welcome you all to the first episode of the Future Work series, also here in Silicon Valley. So these series of episodes / discussions, I would say, will consist of 1-hour events where we have professionals from Silicon Valley give their take on technology trends, and especially the future of work in this post-COVID-19 world. So with that, and to provide you with additional background, the Future of Work series is organized by Cognitive Talent Solutions, also known as CTS. We also got DCH and HR Tech Hub. So again, welcome everyone. Let's get started here. So we'll start off with the guest introductions, and then we'll go into the panel questions. And again, I like to make it very comfortable for everyone. So if you have any questions at any time, feel free to ask, and I'll try to integrate it into the discussions accordingly. So in today's episode, it's titled as the hybrid workforce, which is on-site versus remote work. And this episode will be structured as a fireside chat, providing the audience with a unique perspective of a VC partner from HP Tech Ventures, a corporate executive from Indeed, a startup founder, and then maybe even an angel investor on the challenges and opportunities presented by different workplace strategies. So I was thinking we could start with introductions, and maybe Angelo, would you like to start first?
Sure, happy to. Nice to meet everybody, and thank you for coming. I'm Angelo Priore. I'm a partner at HP Tech Ventures, HP's corporate venture arm. I sit on 6 boards, and I'm an advisor and angel investor in another 6 tech startups, all scattered around the U.S. and Canada, from Silicon Valley and LA up to Toronto, New York, Detroit, and a couple of other places in between. So nice to meet you all.
Awesome. Carmen, would you like to go next?
Absolutely. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everyone on the call. My name is Carmen Bryant. I'm the marketing director for the US at Indeed.com. So I'm focused on leading a team, helping leaders like yourselves connect with all of Indeed's products, programs, solutions, insights, data, all of the things that we have to really help you be able to hire great teams and hire great talent. I don't necessarily want to assume that everybody knows who Indeed is. I see we have a lot of global representation. We are the #1 job site in the world. More than 250 million unique visitors come to our site every month to find jobs. And we've been maniacally focused on this for the past 16 years. So really excited to be a part of this conversation.
Awesome. And then lastly, Francisco, could you give yourself an introduction?
Sure. Hi, Kay, and really excited to be here today launching this series. So my name is Francisco. I'm the co-founder and CEO of CTS. We are a people analytics startup focused on organizational network analysis, and we help companies visualize and analyze how employees interact with each other through online surveys and by looking at digital footprints in tools like Office 365. We help them understand what are their internal collaboration dynamics, productivity, burnout, and identify their informal leaders.
Awesome. Okay, and then lastly, you guys have me, which is Kay. I'm an angel investor here in Silicon Valley, but today, I'm going to be your awesome host and going to make this as fun as possible. So it's moving pretty quickly, but we're going to dive right into the panel questions. The 2 questions that we have for today. I won't give them all yet, but we'll start with the first one. That's what we're going to do for the next 30 minutes. And then we'll reserve 20 minutes for a Q&A from the audience. So you guys all ready for the first question? Okay, let's do it then. So question number 1, what workplace strategy has your organization adopted during the pandemic? And how was it different from the previous strategy? Angelo, could we start with you?
Sure, and I can talk about HP a little bit. I can also talk about what I've seen in our portfolio companies. So the offices have been open for kind of people who need to be there for probably about 3 months now, maybe 4, where some engineers, right, are going in because they actually need to work on chemistry, they actually need to work on hardware, etc. I can't even go into the office, right? I'm like, yeah, you're not going. I haven't even asked. I had a colleague ask, like, what? You're a VC? No, you don't have to meet. So it's just really very much safety first. HP's got a great culture. We're in tough markets, but it really is like a people-centric organization, and why I've stuck around for so long. From the startups perspective that I've seen, some of them have like disbanded their offices. Like, all right, we're out of here, right? Because we're a bunch of software engineers. Like, yeah, we want to collaborate, but we're also just going to use Slack and Discord and and doesn't make a difference. Some of the groups are like, we're going to re-up our rent. We're all coming back into the office, right? And that's a little bit more hardware-centric company. So it's really interesting seeing this huge splay of what's happened. Of some people are just like, all right, Costa Rica, and then some people are like, nope, I am staying right where I am, and we're not going to change anything, and this is working for me. So, and it's not like one person's more successful than the other. So it's really just like, wow, what a hodgepodge.
And could you speak a little bit more on maybe the strategies that you think, the different strategies that you're seeing out there, if you could share?
So in Silicon Valley, right, some of the big companies, I think, some companies, right, without going to name names, are like, you're going to be in the office, right? Whether it's financial services company in New York City or big behemoth, right, in Silicon Valley. And I'm just like, I've been working for a while. I think most people are adults, or even if you're a young adult, are mature. And it's like, hey, I've got a job. I am not going to succeed if I am surfing every morning, right? So I think most people are going to be able to adjust if they have the space, if they have the resources, et cetera, to deal with it. So I don't think it's going to be a snapback, right? Like, hey, if on average, let's say people spend 4.7 days a week in the office, I think that's going to get cut in half. On average, right? Well, guess what? All the traders need to be together or whatever, right? There's always going to be certain pockets of people. I'm a big proponent of like, just work where you need to work, where everyone pick a day where you're in the office to collaborate. I'm projecting here. What I do is before the pandemic, because my job is so startup focused, I would go into the Palo Alto office like half a day a week. And I literally sometimes wouldn't even open up my computer. I literally would just talk to executives, talk to engineers, just talk to people, right? To understand what the needs are, to build the goodwill, right? To help each other, to chit chat. I literally would hang out in the cafeteria for 2 hours. And I could go for lunch, and then I'd see someone, then I'd see someone else. Oh, then it's time for coffee. Then I see someone else. Oh, then I have another coffee appointment. And then but I don't go there to do deep thinking, right?
Right.
So I would always I had the luxury of like, mornings, I'm going to do my thinking, such as it was, and like be alone and actually try to shut off. Like, I would never have a tweet deck open, right? Like, no, I can't deal with that. It's too overwhelming. I just want to read for 2 hours. I just want to think about something, or even play with a spreadsheet or do a TAM analysis.
Yeah.
And then have different parts of the day. That's, again, I had this luxury where, okay, in the afternoons, I'm going to meet 4 startups at Galvanize or at this place. And then I just kind of get into that mindset. And I'm just like, why can't we give, again, if people are, up for the challenge. And I remember when I first started doing this 15 years ago, it was a challenge, because I'd start like gardening, like, stop, I'm working. Like, you want to garden? That's great. Do it at lunchtime. Don't take 10 minutes, because before you notice, 20 minutes. So I think people have kind of learned the muscle, right? We all are like, oh, I got to buy a new display, or I got to buy a keyboard, or I got to buy a desk or a chair. I said, okay, we've all kind of found space wherever we're at. You're in a closet or your basement or wherever. And it's just like, hey, we're all saving 2 hours. What's the average commute time in the US? Almost 2 hours. Like, how can that time not be better utilized? Even if the worker uses up all that time for themselves personally, like, are they going to come into work less stressed? Are they coming in a little bit not worried because like they don't have to like have that extra buffer of traffic and just stuff? I think it's a better way. I've only had a handful of in-person meetings, and it's just like, oh, what a time suck. Like, why am I driving to San Jose for like a meeting, right?
Yeah. Yep.
So.
No, I think you're spot on with that. And your comment about the whole tweet deck thing, the one thing I felt about just the changes of this environment is definitely the increasing consumption of data, as well as all these notifications. So interesting insight. Carmen, I did notice that we had a few more people join, so I'm going to repeat the question to you. I'd love for you to go next. But the question was, what workplace strategy has your organization adopted during the pandemic, and how was it different from the previous strategy?
Yes, absolutely. It's been a big sort of shift since the past, what are we at, 13 months, 14 months. So I think the first thing was that we sent home 10,000 employees around the world overnight. And, you know, one of the first things that we realized is that we had to really work to meet people where they were. So there's a lot of different job functions within Indeed. There's a lot of different sort of generations within Indeed. And so being able to meet people in terms of how do we help them prepare their space? How do we help them maybe set up an office? How do we just enable them to be able to be productive? And then also, how do we measure productivity? You know, for like a marketing organization or other organizations that might be more focused on projects or a body of work, it was a little bit easier. But we also have a very large sales organization that was very task driven. And so we also had to prepare managers to be able to coach to a body of work as opposed to specific tasks. Mm-hmm. So it was really initially very much an all hands on deck kind of approach to think about how do we create a structure where we can be can provide support across the board, but can also, you know, meet people where they are. Everybody was at home. We were already a very globally distributed company where people were accustomed to coming in and out of offices, right. For the most part. I would have said that I was in the office 4 days a week, but those 4 days were probably across New York and Austin and maybe, you know, even London. So wow. It was, we were very used to that. So that element was a little bit easier. I do think, though, that it's going to be interesting as, you know, we're now sort of starting to think about how do we go back to work. We have not had anyone in the office. We're going to be opening up Australia and Singapore this month, but it's, you know, we've been fairly conservative and really being, you know, safety first in terms of our approach to this. You know, I also have the benefit of having spoken to a lot of different companies and organizations. And I think for companies like, you know, mine or others that are very much have a very large sort of like knowledge worker population, it might have been a little bit more straightforward, but I'm also talking to companies that have a huge, you know, manufacturing or logistics component. And there's been this huge conversation almost of the haves and have-nots. There are the people who kind of can go home and do that work. But if you're in an Amazon warehouse, right. You can't do that at home. Right. How do you start to think about, you know, what do you do for those populations and what are the you know, support that you need to provide for those workers? Right.
Thank you for that. And then Francisco, if I could repeat one more time, the question is, what workplace strategy has your organization adopted during the pandemic, and how was it different from the previous strategy?
Well, at CTS, even though we are headquartered in Palo Alto, we have always operated with a globally distributed team as well. So the interactions between our team members have taken place remotely before and during the pandemic. However, when it comes to interactions between our team members and external stakeholders, for example, clients, partners, or investors, we have transitioned from an on-site first to a remote first strategy. What I mean by this is that before the pandemic, we were trying to meet in person with clients, partners, and investors whenever possible, because it was really helping us build rapport with them, and it was increasing the probability of a successful outcome, whether it was closing a deal, establishing a new partnership, or receiving an investment with the right terms. But however, during the pandemic, we are prioritizing remote interactions with clients, partners, and investors whenever possible in order to reduce our exposure to the virus, of course. But we have found that they will often require at least one in-person meeting before making an important decision, and this is part in the end of their due diligence process. In our case, at CTS, we work with large companies to implement our cloud-based platform for organizational network analysis. So we typically would start with a pilot involving between 500 to 1,000 employees and then move to a global replication. In the current context, we are finding that it's been relatively easy to close a pilot interacting only remotely with the clients. However, they will typically require at least one on-site meeting before signing a larger contract for a global replication. Unfortunately, this is still not ideal, but we try to have those on-site meetings only when it's really needed, and ensuring, of course, that social distance measures are put in place. Moreover, because our technology allows us to map the interactions between employees inside of our client's organization, we are noticing that most companies are struggling to deal with the isolation of their new hires. And this isolation often happens because those new people that join the organization did not have the on-site interactions during the adaptation period. And in that context, we are helping them identify who are the informal leaders, and so they can position them as buddies of those new hires and prevent their isolation, and also accelerate their time to productivity.
Awesome. And so, I could also share some of my insight as well, though I would argue that the business that I'm in, which is angel investing, is not that different from what Angelo's doing. But maybe I'll take a step back and look at it from a global macro investor perspective and what I noticed happened to the global economy as we moved into lockdown with COVID-19. So the way that I'm just analyzing the markets, when you have access to the public markets, it's basically a portal into all the equities, all the companies in the world and how they operate. And what I came to conclusion as I was observing that was that things were divided with COVID-19, things were divided into, I guess you would say, three different pockets or three different categories of businesses or economies that the governments were trying to save. So we have the real economy, the financial economy, and the digital economy, right? Those are the three economies I noticed. And the start of COVID-19, what happened was, well, the real economy just got disrupted, right? They couldn't meet in person, all the physical work, it just had to be put on pause. And then I saw the governments move into money printing mode to save the economy, save the real economy. But as they were trying to save the real economy, it juiced the financial economy, right? And so starting, with the recovery of the whole COVID situation, we're seeing financial markets rally even higher. And then on top of that, I saw the digital economy, right? Financial money printing juiced the financial economy. The digital economy was even more aggressive, right? Because the whole world went away from, let's say, the real economy and moved right into the digital economy. So it looked like the digital economy, people who were already remote, benefited quite a bit. The real economy got hurt, and the financial economy is just, well, it's just a beneficiary of financial engineering. So that's sort of a global macro insight that I just wanted to share from my experience looking at all these different startups and thinking about all the different models that exist out there. I'd like to move on to the second question to the panelists, and we'll start again with Angelo. So the question for number 2 is, how do you envision the workplace strategy of your organization and similar organizations evolving in the future? Basically, how does this all look like moving forward?
So primarily being as an investor in the digital economy, to your point, Kai,
Yep.
the company's benefited tremendously, right? Because, two of my investments have hardware components, but the others are just pure software plays.
Yeah.
And they're in gaming or AR and VR, right? Well, guess what? Everyone's playing a game, right? Everyone's working remotely, right? So we've just seen this huge transformation, right? In terms of like the secular rise that they're benefiting from. And then just making it personal, like HP, well, guess what? The office print division didn't do so well, right? Like very much a real economy, like who's going to the office to print, right? Nobody, right? But then on the other side, like, okay, we're just going to do instant ink at home. So it's been really fascinating to watch and get a firsthand, I like your kind of summation of the three worlds in it, right?
Yeah.
And you can see kind of who's getting hurt and who's getting helped by it. And it's just like, I've always tried to appreciate the role of luck, right? In our lives, in our careers, good luck, bad luck, right? It's like, you're just in the wrong place. So, there's a sector, whatever, I won't go into names, but like there's certain sectors of the gaming or the VR industry that got crushed, right? It's like, and then some of them are just like, boom, 10x.
Yeah.
Right. And, people make it what they can of it. So anyway, it's just, it's interesting to watch. And actually, as an investor, this is like, there's always recessions, right? But this is kind of like changing the game, right? Forcing all this stuff towards digital, right? Like, hey, music concerts are going to come back, travel's going to come back. Well, yeah, some portion of it, right? But maybe not 100% of it.
Yeah.
So it's just kind of like, it really makes me like, scratch my head and puzzle over like, like this isn't just going to be like, okay, it's the same old, same old. This is like really transformative. It's like, oh, there's a new energy source, or right? Because now there's a new way of doing a whole bunch of things. My wife's like, do we have to go back to Costco? Can we just do online shopping? Good question, right? Like, so.
Yeah. No, Angela, I love your insight on things. I really think, how this, like you said, well, like I was saying earlier, the real economy, as I noticed in the different sectors. So if you look at like industrials or basic materials or anything that's like very real economy related, you notice like those stocks just collapsed and they were taking forever to recover. And then on the flip side, you look at the technology subsegment or industry, the software application software or infrastructure software, they just exploded. So the stock market's amazing in a sense that you could track this inflation, where money's moving and where it shows you where the economy, where the people think the economy is going next. So,
and I think that's a really slow. Some people are slower to move. The analogy I always use is, right, brands, for example, didn't advertise on mobile, right?
Yeah.
Like everyone's eyes were on mobile, right? This shows you how old I am, right? 15 years ago. And brands were just like, oh no, TV. Well, like now they're switching over. Now they've switched over to mobile, right? It's actually kind of in balance. Like the amount of time you spend on mobile, the amount of advertising in mobile versus TV, right? It's great. Well, like now, like gaming is that way, right? And there are all these other things that have now like shifted radically. And it's like, hey, that's where the value is. That's where people are spending their time. But we haven't all adjusted fully, right? Because we get used to doing things in a certain way. So we'll see.
Yeah. Okay. I love to bring the question next to Carmen. Again, the question is, how do you envision the workplace strategy of your organization and similar organizations evolving in the future?
Absolutely. And I hope the answer is that no, we don't have to go back to Costco, because that's my plan, to not have to go back to a grocery store and continue to do that online. I would be remiss representing Indeed if I didn't talk about the implications for talent and what I think is going to happen there, because we can't unsee what we've seen. And I think companies have been able to prove that they can operate remotely, and employees have been able to demonstrate that they can operate and be productive remotely. So I think even when we go back to the office, we're going to see, virtual hiring and interviewing continuing. Before the pandemic, less than 1% of our interviews were virtual. In 1 month, that increased like 1,000%. And as a result, that's where a lot of our effort and energy was spent. Trying to enable the companies that did need to hire, and there were lots of companies that were hiring, to be able to hire that talent and onboard that talent really quickly. And I think that also is going to have implications for where we source talent. It used to be, if you were in a market, you found the talent in that market, with maybe some minimal exception. That will potentially shift a bit, as we start to open up the talent pool, and of course, then there are implications for how you think about compensation, because, certainly in the States, we've typically thought about that being informed by location of the job. And I think also piggybacking on what Francisco said when he was talking about isolation, I think along with that is going to be a huge focus on culture, and how we really integrate employees into organizations where maybe they don't have as many in-person touch points, or maybe they're not going directly into an office as often. Certainly for a lot of tech companies in Silicon Valley and around the world, there's also a huge office culture around the perks that you provide and all of those kinds of amenities. How will those types of things have to be rethought in terms of attracting talent? So I think, from our perspective, we really see that as being massive for our organization, but really for all organizations. Online collaboration, how do we start to create, ways for teams to really be able to work together? That's going to be much more broadly relevant than it was before the pandemic. So I think that's going to be another area. And then, the final thing, and I've certainly felt this really intensely Where I sit in the States and in the conversations that I've had is, you know, with so much happening around social justice and AI ethics, I think data is going to play a much larger role in how we think about addressing that, as opposed to being sort of a soft kind of, you know, thing that we think about is how do you actually look at data to really, you know, optimize and think about bias and address your algorithm. So, you know, we're really thinking a lot about it from a talent perspective, certainly, you know, because we're an employer of a large population, but because, you know, all of our companies, every company, right, is in a battle for talent, and we're seeing that play out pretty aggressively right now on our platform.
Yeah. So I want to reemphasize on what, you know, you have such a unique insight being positioned at Indeed. And you mentioned that prior to the pandemic, less than 1% of resources were allocated to capitalize on the internet jobs opportunity. But post-pandemic, it just skyrocketed to 1,000% over. That's absolutely incredible because, again, Indeed is like that hub for, like, you know, all the jobs, and you get to see that perspective. So I really enjoyed that view. And then the other thing I want to ask you as well, I recall listening to a pretty top, I guess you call headhunter firm out there, and he made a comment that I thought was just so fascinating about the industry. What he said was that it's the industry that hires you guys in your world. And I was just like, I never thought about that, because most people, when they get a job, they think about, this is the company, that's my boss, that's my employer. But in your world, your industry, or your world of recruiting or jobs, the industry employs you. Amazing.
Yeah, it is. I mean, it is the industry. And so it's a unique, it's actually a really interesting perspective because we're so focused on job seekers.
Yeah.
But we leverage it, you know, I'm working with companies and organizations, and you know, they have to know exactly, I shouldn't say exactly, like we really want to enable them with as much intelligence as possible about sort of the job seeker mindset.
Yeah.
Because that is what really gives them a competitive advantage. And also what we hope is that they'll be able to then provide better, you know, workplaces, culture, it's just better matching all around. Yeah, no, like we think about it very holistically. But there is sort of this sense of how do you start to segment out like the knowledge worker population versus, you know, sort of like the real and the digital economies that you were talking about, right? Because even in talent, it plays out that way.
It is absolutely an amazing perspective, I feel, because right now I think, you know, with cryptocurrencies being so hot, I know cryptocurrency is probably a very poor word to define innovation that's happening in that space. I think the proper word is like blockchain technology. But from your unique perspective, you might be seeing a whole world mobilizing, a human capital mobilizing to tackle that decentralization category.
Yeah,
so
and
it's amazing.
Also, and you see lots of different companies at different stages of sophistication, right? When it comes to that as well. So you have to be able to manage all of that, which I'm sure everybody on the call understands that piece.
Oh man, I love it. Okay, we got to save some time for Francisco. So Francisco, we talked a lot, but I got to repeat the question just for you. How do you envision the workplace strategy of your organization and similar organizations evolving in the future?
Yeah, so I 100% agree with what Carmen said. I think that culture is going to be key, and it's going to be really important for companies to learn ways on how they can, again, understand their internal collaboration dynamics. And because of technology is so powerful, you know, it can be used really to mitigate some of the conscious and unconscious biases that exist right now, or it can make them worse, right? So it's important that companies get familiar with all the new range of technologies that are being at their disposal, and they can use that in the most appropriate manner. Startups like ourselves, for example, sometimes we find ourselves in our situation where we are working with a new technology for which there is not even previous experience in terms of data privacy or best practices. So we have to create them. And much of the work that we do is about educating our clients on how to best use these technologies. Now, I think that as more people get vaccinated and there are fewer cases and the restrictions are more relaxed, our in-person interactions with clients, partners, and investors are going to become way more frequent. However, I think that because during the pandemic, these clients, partners, and investors are starting to learn to rely more on remote interactions, at least for their initial stages of their engagements with startups. After the pandemic, on-site interactions will not be as frequent as they were before the pandemic. So to sum it up, on-site interactions will be more frequent than now, but not as frequent as they were before the pandemic. In some cases, this might be because after the pandemic, some clients, partners, and investors will probably be already used to the benefits of working with a distributed workforce, for example, in terms of cost efficiency. So many of those stakeholders that before were co-located in a single place now will be spread across the globe. So those interactions will naturally happen remotely. But in other cases, it will be due to permanent changes, I think, in the behavior of those clients, partners, and investors, because ultimately, when the pandemic is over, hopefully, and we can analyze it in retrospective, I think it will likely be viewed as a catalyst that accelerated automation and decentralization trends that were already in place. Whatever the future holds, because there is no way to know for sure, but whatever it holds in terms of a certain workplace strategy becoming maybe more mainstream than other, ultimately, I think it's startups that might benefit the most because of their expected ability to adapt to changes in their environment. If we as a startup, for example, were not able to adapt to these changes and were impacted in a negative manner because of the new reality that we're going to find after the pandemic, we would in any case struggle to be successful because in the process of scaling up our operations, we are already required as a startup to be constantly adapting to an ever-changing reality. This is certainly true for multinationals too, but I think it's particularly relevant for startups because our value proposition, our organizational structure is more likely to change during the process of scaling up our operations. Just to wrap up, I think that if companies and startups want to thrive or at least want to survive in this new reality, they will have to learn to leverage technology to understand those internal collaboration dynamics of their teams, prevent isolation, manage culture in a more informed manner, whether it is through organizational network analysis or through a wide range of technologies that are emerging now. It's going to be a really exciting time.
Yeah, I definitely agree with you that it's going to be an amazing time, a new dynamic reality, or whatever you want to call it. I love the conversation that we've had so far. It's incorporated everything from, I don't know, global macro, regulatory related reasons, technology, culture, everything. I want to just close out the formal panel part of the questions with just this insight that I have about where things are going and why I think they're going this way. So as I was observing the markets through many, let's say, several different cycles, I came to realize like there's different stages to capitalism. So there's the early stage, the mid stage, and the late stage. And this past pandemic that we just had was like a complete poker hand reveal from the government side that I think we moved into late stage capitalism. And I'll explain to you what I see in late stage capitalism. So in early stage capitalism, right, you have business cycles and boom bust cycles. Things will actually bust. Asset prices will correct, right? That was probably before 2001, 2008. And then mid-stage capitalism, it looks like, where you did have boom bust cycles. But in 2001, 2008, when you had a boom bust cycle, the governments would step in and you had a hybrid of free markets and controlled markets, right? So in the early stage capitalism, it's purely free markets. In the mid-stage capitalism, 2001, 2008, it's kind of hybrid, right? They kind of hold the hand of the economy. But with this most recent pandemic, I think we just moved into this new paradigm shift, reality, whatever you want to call it, late stage capitalism, where it almost looks like a full control economy, which is a little provocative to say. I don't mean to be offensive or anything, but the amount of fiscal policy, right? The free checks they're giving out, the monetary policy, the control of like money supply and all that, the easy low interest rates and all that, it changes the dynamics of the business game, right? So going back to what I said earlier about the three different types of economies, the real economy, the financial economy, and the digital economy. And this is me adding that regulatory flavor to our discussion. The real economy is broken. Well, it got disrupted from COVID-19. And the governments are doing whatever they can to hold it up because 90% of the population, I think, is there, right? And then 10% of the population hang out in the financial economy and the digital economy. So the people who are in, let's say, who hold a lot of financial assets, like Warren Buffett, or Elon Musk, let's say, became the richest person in the world at one point during the pandemic, which is kind of crazy. And in the digital economy, people, right? So I think the acceleration with the regulatory flavor is we're going to move towards the digital economy. And the regulation is saying from their financial profile, the structural forces of the government profile around the world, everyone's printing money, it looks like. I think they're saying this game's going to continue, and we just officially moved into late stage capitalism, where it is a full-on control economy until the game resets and see where it goes from there. So that's how I wanted to close it out, just to kind of give you that regulatory flavor to the discussion to make it super dynamic for all the people that came here today. The last part is we got about 20 minutes left. I want to move to the informal Q&A session with the audience. And so I did notice that we do have one question. And I would also encourage the audience, the 54 people that we have in here, to ask any questions to any one of us, and we could just get into that dynamic conversation for the last 20 minutes. So the first question that we have, and we could bring it around to everyone on the panel, is what are the current problems you see in the workplace? And Angelo, maybe we could circle it back to you.
I feel bad. You keep asking me first, but okay. Next question.
I'm going in that rotation.
I just feel guilty. There are lots of problems in the workplace. It's a really big question. From gig economy workers who aren't really gig economy workers, but are being forced to kind of take on all the variability, right?
Yep.
Like, it's just, oof, it's hard to people stressing out. Right? Sometimes about important things, but sometimes really not, like a life and death thing. But if people just, don't have that support and, and just get overwhelmed with things. That's a very heavy loaded question for me. I'm sorry. It's interesting to take up something that Carmen was saying beforehand, right? Like before, there used to be like, hey, you want to live in this state, you get paid this much. You want to live in that country? Well, we're going to really lower the wages, right?
Yep.
And then you see some people, right, with the wherewithal to kind of flee high tax countries or states or give up their citizenship, right? So it's to take a longer view in the early, mid-stage capitalism, right? It's people's ability to kind of play games with their residency, right? Like buy a golden passport, right?
Yeah.
I'll call it interesting, right? In terms of just like, okay, where's the power dynamics, right? Yeah, is Elon Musk is moving to Texas, right? Is he going to move to Ireland because he can save another, X percentage on his on his income taxes?
Right.
So this is kind of a really big, like, okay, what's the role of government versus the individual worker, and who holds the cards? And that's obviously where you are in the pyramid. It's going to vary what you're going to be able to do to kind of, to get to your objectives.
Yeah. So I see the questions popping in here. We're gonna try our best to get to everyone. So Carmen, what are some current problems you see in the workplace? And I think you got a unique perspective as well.
I feel bad, Angelo. I had a little bit of time to think about what I was going to say.
All good.
I don't know. I'd say the one that I hear about probably the most frequently is about mental health and worker well-being, and companies really struggling to figure out how to support employees. There's a lot of burnout. There's a lot of just sort of with everything going on in the world, right? Like, how do you sort of balance sort of empathy and productivity and those kinds of things? And companies struggling with how to support their employees, but also thinking about where does the employee's responsibility begin and the company's responsibility end. And so we've been hearing a lot from companies about this. And I think especially now, because there's a huge focus on retention and engagement. It hasn't been as much about, in every situation, attracting talent, but how do we keep the talent that we do have and how do we keep them engaged? So that's the thing that I've been hearing about the most.
Yep. And then Francisco, I know you work with some powerful, people analytics tools. So what are some issues you see in the workplace today with your perspective, unique perspective?
Well, yeah, so we are privileged because we had the opportunity to actually analyze the collaboration dynamics of both medium, small, and large companies. We see companies struggling again with isolation of especially new hires. We found that on average, people that join within the last 6 months they have now 61% fewer interactions with their colleagues than the people with the same level of experience prior to the pandemic. So these new hires are really isolated at home, right? We found as well that it really depends on the companies, but the number of meetings, it has skyrocketed. We've seen companies having 600% more meetings than before the pandemic. But this really depends on the company and to which extent they have adopted remote work. I think ultimately we can really pinpoint to many specific problems, but I like to think about it in terms of root causes. I think the root cause of many of the problems that we have in organizations nowadays is the same a problem that societies have, that countries have, is that they are having often, or we are all having often a reactive approach when it comes to adoption of new technologies and new ways of working that exist in the market versus a proactive approach. So for example, in the past, before the pandemic, companies were adopting agile methodologies. There was really a new shift in thinking. It was making companies more horizontal, more dynamic, less bureaucratic. I was working at IBM for 5 years, and I was a witness of one of the largest agile transformations that the company ever went through, right? But still, within the agile framework, you are still operating with a matrix organization that has a lot of problems related to it. Now, for example, companies are working remotely, but still, we're operating with the same type of hierarchies. At its core, the work that we have right now is the same, just done remotely. I think that the real change that is happening is what you mentioned about the digital economy, right? New technologies that are enabling fully decentralized organizations. When I mean decentralized, is that you don't even have a hierarchy in those organizations, right? I think the closer the organizations get to the adoption of these new technologies and the faster they approach it, the better the experience is going to be for the employees, because otherwise you always feel a disconnect. Ultimately, I think that what is working fine in startups and small companies that we actually lose as we scale up our operations is that you can work with whom you want on what you want. So you're passionate about it, and it's completely different experience. In the moment you have already 500 employees, you start working on what you are supposed to work, and you have to assign people to do certain work. And, as it's really important, we have discussed very often about this topic, right? If we move into a world where more and more organizations are going to be decentralized in terms of operating, like, for example, based on cryptocurrencies and without hierarchy, how that future is going to look like, and what's going to happen if those decentralized organizations are going to be controlled by centralized organizations. Are you going to end up with something worse than what we have right now, or is it going to be actually better? In many cases, it's going to be really exciting to see.
Yeah, I truly believe that there might be we might move into a hybrid world, right? Of like, you got centralized protocols or centralized companies as well as decentralized companies, and they're just gonna have to figure out how to work together. So I just got a bunch of questions coming in. Maybe we could get a little bit more informal here, just a little warning to you guys. And I'll just kind of ask the questions and feel free to answer it however. I think we answered this one already, but Jose Manuel asked, thanks for the fantastic session. One question is, how are organizations dealing with stress and well-being of employees on this pretty mentally demanding time? Any changes from previous approach? I think we kind of discussed that, but if anyone wants to chime in on that, feel free.
I think people are just trying to listen to their employees more. I think that's a big thing, trying to provide safe and brave spaces. And I'll have one plug. I would also encourage you, if you're a company based in the US, to go to your company page on Indeed, because we track well-being metrics. So you can see how your company is performing on things like, belonging and trust. Because I think a lot of those kinds of metrics are where we're starting to see companies really paying attention.
Yeah. So we have a comment from Santiago here. He said, I wouldn't call Warren Buffett that much as into the financial economy. He prefers assets tied to real value creation in the real economy rather than speculation such as, I think, blockchain technologies. So yeah, I definitely agree with that comment. Financial economy wise, he holds a lot of financial instruments that are tied to the real economy. And then for the speculative, aggressive play, you could think of maybe like Kathy Wood in her ARK portfolio. A question from Jose. would you start now, right now, making structural changes on actual office, or would you keep it as it is? When will be the best time to do so? If anyone would like to answer that one.
I'd like to add something first, just to follow up on the previous question on burnout. I'd like to add that technology is offering a great opportunity to manage burnout and stress in a more informed manner. For example, part of the work that we do at CTS, we help companies analyze their digital footprint at team level, and by monitoring changes in behavioral patterns, for example, response time or percentage of communication sent outside working hours, you can actually assess burnout risk at team level, and you can use this information basically to focus on the teams that are struggling the most. I think that it's very important for companies to start integrating data to make more informed decisions about burnout, because we're just starting to see the real impact of this problem. When it comes to the redesign of the offices, there's a perspective here that I think we are not considering very often, because of my wife is an interior designer. I have often discussed this topic with her, but I think that as the way we work is going to evolve, the design of the offices themselves have to evolve as well, right? It doesn't make sense if we're going to move to a hybrid model where people are going to choose whether they go to the office or not, and when they go to the office, they really want to have some informal interactions. It doesn't make sense to operate with cubicles, right? Or and in that regard, I like a lot, for example, new technologies that are emerging, like for example, biomimicry, using the nature as inspiration to design more organic offices. Hypersurface is very exciting as well. Materials that change intuitively or based on the reaction to the environment. I think this type of design technologies open huge opportunities for adapting the offices to the new reality.
So I want to add to the office comment. So I lecture on investments every Sunday, and I remember before COVID-19, we were doing it inside an office in Cupertino in Silicon Valley. And the funny part is, I had a gentleman in there ask me like, "Hey, when I worked back in my time, I had an office space with a door." And in that moment, he said that, I was just thinking like, if you look at a macro trajectory or the secular trend of an office space, the usage of it, back then he said he had an office space with a door, then it converted to high cubicles, then it converted to open desks concept, and then now we're at work from home, right? And then at the same time, you have real estate prices going up on the other side. So piggybacking off the question of what I think about office space, I think Francisco is right. We're going to adapt to how prices of real estate becomes and the technology aspect of it. So when you look at global corporations like WeWork right now, it's pretty amazing that they're kind of just doing what I guess residential real estate's doing, like apartments, for example, but it's like different co-working spaces of each startup. Anyone that wants to venture out, become an entrepreneur. So very fascinating. I wanted to share that. Some more questions here. Let's see. One question: how are your organizations dealing with stress? I think we read that one already. Where are you planning to invest with a horizon of 2 to 3 years, from a well-being perspective as an employer, and then B, from your personal individual perspective? That's a pretty fun one.
I'm going to continue. I mean, the prices have gotten, high, but gaming and entertainment, I think, have this, like I said, this secular trend. And I think in the gaming space, all these things that we have in the real world haven't happened in the digital world.
Yep.
Right. There's just so many places where we're missing parts of that functionality, whether that's the crypto, whether that's tournaments for esports. There's so many places where we're just missing huge swaths of functionality. So I think that's a huge opportunity. And then well-being, just speaking from as an investor perspective, I've been big into AR and VR, the ability to train people, right, remotely, because it's dangerous, because it's expensive, because it's remote, security, privacy. So, this has been publicly announced. We're trying to get people's cognitive and emotional load as they're going through training, as they're going through education. So think about it simply like, hey, I want to be a better public speaker. Okay, let's do eye tracking. Did you look at the right side of the audience, or did you always stay on the left? But then also it's like, I'm going through training as a surgeon, as a police officer. Was I stressed? Was I too excited? Like, what was my heart rate doing? And like, instead of just saying, hey, Angela, you got a 50 out of 100. It's like, well, here's where you did poorly, and here's why. I think there's all this potential to help kind of get us to be better. And there's now all these efficacy studies, like do you want your surgeon practicing on your knee surgery? You know, if he hasn't done it in a year or she hasn't done it in a year, do you want her to practice a couple times before she like opens you up, right? It's like, please practice twice. So that's where I'm looking at, you know, gaming, entertainment, AR, VR, and it's typically around like biometrics, bioanalytics, like understanding the human condition better through various kind of sensors and various, mostly through deep learning, understanding kind of what's happening with folks.
Yeah, so this might be an interesting insight. I agree with you on the gaming part, and it's the whole like if you think about it from a world perspective, I forget what the population of gamers are, but the population of gamers are actually going up. And if we could find a way to turn that, you know, turn everything into gamification, which is basically bringing that gaming human capital into real world economic world realities, which would be pretty interesting. So for me personally, I'm 100% software, mostly enterprise software. But as of recent, I started diving into cryptocurrencies. Now, again, cryptocurrency is a very poor word to define the space, but it's really blockchain technologies. And within cryptocurrencies, there's different segments that I'm looking at. Now, probably the risky one is probably the cryptocurrency, which is the ones that challenge like fiat currency and the sovereigns, right? The governments.
Dogecoin, totally no.
Yeah. So that's a category of cryptos out there. But the category of cryptos that I truly like is probably the technology cryptos, the platform cryptos. So like Ethereum, where that's like an AWS or an app store where people are building applications on top.
Actual utility. No, and I picked Dogecoin as they kind of like
as a currency. Yeah, that one's more
like,
of a.
There's no value. It's not that people think there's value. Like
that one's more of a speculative currency, which is a little risky from a government regulatory perspective. Assuming we're still in the centralized world, moving to both hybrid world. And then there's another category going back to the gaming, which is like asset-backed, revenue-backed tokens, right?
Yeah.
So I started looking around the world, and I noticed that there's this concept where, maybe some of you guys heard of the game called Crypto Kitties or Axie Infinity. Yeah. So it's very fascinating because some of the characters in those games, they're unique. Because today, if you played a game like World of Warcraft or whatever, you spend your time in a centralized game, and then you put the game down, and it doesn't become an asset. But in the new world of decentralized games, when you play those games, you actually build up value associated with, like, let's say Ethereum value. So these in-game assets that you spend your time working for have real world value, which is incredibly interesting because you might grow out of games, right? From your college days to adult days, but you can actually sell your in-game assets. Now, there's a variation of this model on top of that was even more fascinating. Let's say you create a high-level in-game character, and that game is worth that character is worth, I don't know, 500,000, literally, or $2 million, Crypto Kitties, right? Or Axie Infinity, in-game character that's worth $2 million. You don't want to play the game anymore. There's another startup or company in the world that's saying you could loan that $2 million character to a worker in the Philippines, and they'll train that character and derive passive income for you. This is the introduction into the metaverse, into the digital game assets that, what I'm seeing moving forward is just the digital world and the physical world are just, that bridge is narrowing and we're slowly blending. And when that happens, it's going to be a very dynamic reality. So I'm seeing massive opportunities left and right in the digital economy. Might have a bias there, but then I feel assisted with the certainty of late stage capitalism, that the governments are going to come in and fix everything. Which
we're going to talk about that later, but that's a phase, because then you could say FDR, then you'd be like, hey, we're in late stage capitalism in 1933, but obviously then we've gone through trials and peaks of that.
Yeah. So guys, it's 9:58. I think we got through all the questions, maybe like 2 or 3 we didn't get to. So I deeply apologize to everyone. But it's been a real pleasure being able to host today and meeting everyone. So thank you all for coming. I'm not sure if you guys had any other last comments, but feel free to chime in if you do.
Thank you for hosting.
Hey, thank you. I just want to make sure we all close on time. Thank you everyone from across the world, and maybe good night as well.
All right.
Bye.
Nice conversation.